The rain was pouring when it happened. A homeless man, soaked and shivering, stepped from the shadows and whispered, "Don't move. Someone's watching you." Seconds later, a knife flashed in the darkness, and he threw himself into the fight, saving a police officer's life with nothing but his bare hands and the loyalty of his old dog. What followed was a story of redemption, love, and the courage to rise from the forgotten corners of the city. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, because you don't want to miss stories like this one, where the most unlikely heroes remind us what humanity truly means. The rain hammered down on the city, a heavy curtain that blurred even the streetlights into pale halos. It drummed against the roof of the patrol car, steady and relentless, like the exhausted heartbeat of a city that never slept. Lieutenant Elena Torres sat behind the wheel, her fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. The shift was nearly over, but her mind refused to rest. Nights like this always kept her sharp, because she knew darkness had a way of hiding the worst things people carried. Her flashlight knocked gently against her hip when she moved, a constant reminder of how quickly routine could turn into chaos. Elena liked to think of herself as composed, unshakable. But rain blurred the edges. It stripped away the differences between clean and dirty, between those with warm homes and those with nothing but a doorway to curl up in. Under the downpour, everyone looked the same. That was when she saw him, a figure slumped against the bricks of a narrow alley, half swallowed by shadow. Next to him, a gray-muzzled German shepherd pressed close, its fur soaked, its eyes fixed on something deeper in the darkness. Elena slowed the car. Instinct told her not to ignore it. Instinct had saved her life before. She stepped out, the door slamming shut behind her. Water splashed up around her boots. The man lifted his head. His face was hidden behind tangled hair and a wild beard, but his eyes burned with something raw and unsettling. "Don't talk," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "Just listen. Someone's watching you." The words cut through the rain like glass. Elena froze. Her hand slid automatically to the grip of her holstered gun, though she didn't draw. He didn't shuffle or sway like a drunk. He didn't beg for change. He just stood there, steady, soaked, pointing with one cracked hand toward the far end of the alley. "I saw him follow your car," the man whispered. His dog growled, the sound low and steady, hackles rising. Every nerve in Elena's body tightened. She swept the alley with her eyes, trash cans overflowing, a drainpipe dripping, a fire escape dripping rust. Empty. Too empty. And that, she knew, was the problem. A sound broke through the hiss of rain. A shoe scraping wet pavement. Elena pivoted fast, flashlight beam slicing into the dark. A figure burst forward, a knife flashing under the streetlight. "Police!" She shouted, "Stop!" But he didn't stop. He charged. The shepherd lunged with a ferocious bark, teeth bared. Elena staggered back, heart pounding, hand fumbling for her weapon. In that split second, everything slowed, water exploding into droplets, steel glinting, her pulse thundering in her ears. And then the ragged man threw himself forward. He collided with the attacker, both of them crashing into the puddles. The knife slashed dangerously close, grazing his face. Elena yanked her gun free, but the two men were a tangle of limbs and shadows, the dogs snapping and snarling at their heels. "Don't shoot!" The man shouted, voice cracking with strain. "I've got him!" The knife arced dangerously. Elena circled, desperate for a clean shot. Rain blinded her, sweat burned her eyes. She raised her weapon skyward and fired once. The gunshot tore through the night, echoing off the wet brick. The attacker flinched, just enough. The homeless man twisted the knife free and flung it across the pavement. It skittered to a stop near Elena's boot. She kicked it far out of reach and lunged in, slamming the cuffs onto the man's wrist with a hard, final snap. Silence. Only rain and ragged breathing. The attacker cursed beneath her, but the fight was over. Elena turned. The man slumped against the wall, his chest heaving, hair plastered to his face. His dog pressed close, tail thumping faintly as though proud. "You saved my life," Elena said, the words catching in her throat. The man shook his head, wiping blood and water from his cheek. "No," he rasped. "I just couldn't watch someone else die." Backup arrived minutes later, red and blue lights washing the alley in color. Officers swarmed, hauling the attacker away. Some glanced skeptically at the ragged man, but Elena's voice cut them short. "He saved me," she said firmly. "Without him, I wouldn't be standing here." The others fell silent. Elena crouched beside him. "What's your name?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, softly, almost like it hurt to say it, he whispered, "Marcus." "Marcus Halle," she repeated it quietly, committing it to memory. Marcus, for the first time that night, his eyes softened. He looked at her as though unsure if she was real. And in the rain, something fragile stirred between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that this man, forgotten by the city, had just proven himself braver than most in uniform. Later, after the reports were written and the suspect booked, Elena drove the empty streets again. The wipers pushed aside the endless rain, but the image of Marcus refused to leave her. His voice, his eyes, the way he'd thrown himself into the fight without hesitation. She knew this wasn't the end of it, and under a bridge across town, Marcus wrapped a tattered blanket around his shoulders, the shepherd curled against his side. He trembled, not just from the cold, but from the strange truth he couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, someone had spoken his name like it still mattered. It was a tiny thing, almost nothing. Yet to him, it felt like the first crack of light breaking into a long, endless night. The rain had finally broken by morning, leaving the streets washed clean but smelling of rust and garbage. Elena Torres sat at her desk, the fluorescent lights of the precinct humming faintly above her. Paperwork piled in front of her like small mountains she had no will to climb. Yet her mind kept wandering back to the alley. Marcus Halle, the name replayed in her head, over and over, as though the syllables themselves carried weight. She had written it into her report, but the lines between the official version and what had truly happened blurred in her mind. The report would reduce him to an unidentified male civilian who assisted in apprehension. But Elena knew the truth was far more than that. He hadn't just assisted. He had saved her, and she couldn't shake the memory of his eyes haunted. Yes, but alive in a way that most people gave up long before the streets swallowed them. By midday, Elena was restless. She logged out early under the pretense of exhaustion and drove through the neighborhoods she thought he might haunt. Underpasses, soup kitchens, shelters. She asked questions quietly, careful not to draw attention. Most shrugged. But one man at a shelter for veterans nodded when she described the gray dog. "The guy with the shepherd?" He said, "Yeah, shows up sometimes, doesn't stay long. Keeps to himself. Smart eyes. Doesn't talk much." That was all Elena needed. She drove slower through the streets that evening, scanning alleys and bus stops. The city had its rhythms, people hurrying home, neon signs blinking alive, the distant wail of a siren cutting across traffic. But she kept searching, as if pulled by something she couldn't name. She found him near a crumbling wall, crouched on a piece of cardboard, Argus at his feet. The dog's ears perked first, alerting Marcus before Elena even stepped out of the car. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face, quickly buried under weariness. "Thought you'd forgotten," he rasped. "Not a chance." She walked over, carrying a brown paper bag. She held it out. "Sandwiches." "And water." He hesitated, then took it silently. Argus wagged his tail at the smell, and Marcus allowed the dog to eat first before taking a bite himself. Elena sat on the curb beside him, ignoring the stares of people passing by. For a long moment, they ate in silence. Finally, she asked the question that had been gnawing at her. Why did you do it? Marcus chewed slowly, staring at the wet pavement. Argus rested his muzzle on Marcus's knee, eyes soft. The man scratched absently behind the dog's ears before answering. Because no one else would, he said simply. And because... He stopped, exhaled. Because you didn't look at me like trash when you first saw me. The honesty hit Elena harder than any weapon could. She wanted to say something, anything, but the lump in her throat held her back. Instead, she nodded, letting the silence between them say more than words could. Over the next weeks, Elena found herself returning. Sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing but conversation. Marcus never asked her to come, yet he never turned her away either. He remained guarded, but little by little, pieces of his story slipped through. He had once been a history teacher. Loved the past, the way stories of civilizations rose and fell. But then came an accident, medical bills, a family that unraveled. One day he had an apartment. A month later, he had the streets. Argus, a rescue pup he'd saved years ago, became the one constant, the anchor that kept him alive when everything else drifted away. He saved me more than once, Marcus admitted one evening, rubbing the dog's head. Sometimes just by being here. Sometimes by reminding me I was still human. Elena listened, her chest tightening. She saw the sharp mind behind the grime, the way he spoke about the world with clarity most people lacked. You're wasted out here, she told him once. He gave a short, bitter laugh. The world doesn't want men like me anymore. She disagreed silently. It was on a stormy Thursday night that things shifted again. The precinct was swamped with calls, but one report froze Elena in her tracks. A missing child in Riverside Park. A boy of 7, vanished from the playground while his parents searched frantically. Officers spread out with flashlights, combing through bushes and trails. Hours passed, hope thinning like the mist rising from the river. Then, out of the shadows, Marcus appeared. Argus tugged at the leash, eager, nose to the ground. He's in there, Marcus said, pointing to a locked maintenance shed. Elena frowned. What makes you think? The dog knows. And so do I. His tone brooked no argument. Trust warred with procedure in Elena's chest. Finally, she shoved her flashlight into her partner's hands and kicked the lock open. Inside, curled up and trembling, was the missing boy. The child's sobs echoed through the night as Elena lifted him into her arms. Behind her, officers stared in disbelief. But when she turned back, Marcus was already walking away, disappearing into the trees. She called after him. Marcus! He paused, barely turning his head. People need you, she said, breathless. Not just me, everyone. The words seemed to strike something deep. He didn't answer, but the silence that followed was heavier than any reply. After that night, Elena couldn't keep quiet. She cornered her captain, laid out the whole truth. How Marcus had saved her life, how he had found the boy, how his instincts and courage had been overlooked because of his rags. At first, the captain scoffed, but Elena's persistence wore him down. Fine, he said gruffly. I'll meet him. Marcus looked uncomfortable when she brought him into the station a few days later. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Officers whispered, sneered, some laughed outright. But Elena stood firm at his side. This is Marcus Halle, she said evenly. He saved my life. He saved a child. And he deserves to be seen. For once, the room fell silent. The captain eyed Marcus for a long moment, then finally spoke. You speak Spanish? Marcus blinked, surprised. And French. Some Arabic, why? The captain leaned back. We could use a translator. Part-time, nothing fancy. Pays lousy. But it's honest work. Marcus hesitated, clutching Argus's leash like a lifeline. His instinct screamed to walk away, to vanish back into the streets. But Elena's quiet voice steadied him. It's not charity, she whispered. It's purpose. And for the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to say yes. His first days were rough. Stares, whispers, doubts. But when he helped a frightened family explain their case, the atmosphere shifted. People began to see not the rags, but the man behind them. He wasn't an officer, but he was part of something again. Alina watched from a distance, pride swelling. For the first time since she'd met him, Marcus didn't look like he was surviving. He looked like he was living, and yet, she knew this was only the beginning. The station smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet, the kind of scent that never quite left no matter how many times the custodian scrubbed. Marcus Halle sat in a corner near the front desk, shoulders hunched. Argus curled loyally at his feet. The dog's ears twitched at every slam of a filing cabinet, every burst of laughter from officers passing by. Marcus pretended to study the forms in front of him. In truth, his hands trembled slightly. He hadn't filled out paperwork in years. His fingers, once steady while writing lectures on ancient civilizations, now shook from too many nights of cold and hunger. A young officer passing by smirked. "Didn't know we were hiring strays now." The words stung, but Marcus didn't look up. He had lived too long on the streets to waste breath on insults. Argus growled low in his throat until Marcus calmed him with a touch. Then a voice broke through. Firm, even. "Enough." Alina stood in the doorway, file in hand, eyes cold as steel. The officer muttered something under his breath and left. Marcus met her gaze for only a second before looking down again. Gratitude mixed with shame. Later, when the room had quieted, Alina sat across from him. "Rough day?" He exhaled. "I've had worse." She smiled faintly. "Then you'll be fine." For a moment, he almost believed her. The days grew into weeks. Marcus translated for families who couldn't make themselves understood. He bridged words between frightened immigrants and impatient officers. Slowly he began to matter. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves when Argus padded into the lobby, whispering excitedly about the police dog, and yet, prejudice clung stubbornly. Some officers still scoffed, others rolled their eyes when he passed. Marcus bore it quietly. He had borne worse. One evening, Alina found him outside the station, leaning against the brick wall, staring at the streetlights. His clothes were cleaner, now donations from the evidence locker, but the weight on his shoulders hadn't lifted. "You don't belong out there anymore," she said softly. He shook his head. "Don't belong in here either," she wanted to argue, but something in his voice told her to wait. The turning point came on a night thick with heat, the kind of summer night that made tempers short and fists quicker than words. Alina was called to a disturbance, near an abandoned warehouse. She arrived to find a small crowd gathered. In the center, Marcus stood pressed against a wall, Argus snarling at a circle of young men. They taunted him, mocking his ragged past, threatening to take the dog. One shoved him hard. Marcus staggered but didn't raise his fists. He had learned long ago that fighting back on the streets only drew more blood. "Police! Drop it!" Alina's voice cracked like a whip. The gang sneered, but the sight of her badge and the siren of backup approaching made them scatter like rats. Alina rushed forward. Marcus was bruised, lips split, one eye already swelling. Argus whined, pressing close to his side. "You okay?" she asked, breathless. He wiped blood from his mouth, eyes flicking away. "I've had worse." "You keep saying that," she muttered, pulling a small first aid kit from her trunk. She dabbed gently at his cut, ignoring his protests. "You don't owe me this," he said, voice tight, her eyes locked with his. "You saved me once. Now it's my turn." For the first time he didn't argue. He let her tend his wounds in silence. Something unspoken passed between them, heavier than any words. From that night, their bond deepened. Alina began leaving small notes where she knew he'd find them, reminders to meet, or simply kind words scrawled on scraps of paper. Marcus tucked them carefully into his worn jacket, treasures he dared not lose. Argus grew fond of her too, bounding forward whenever she appeared. Tail wagging like he had known her forever. The three of them became an unlikely trio: a cop, a forgotten man, and a loyal dog. The city was still cruel, but together they carved out fragments of warmth. And slowly, almost against his will, Marcus began to wonder, what if he could start again? But the thought frightened him. Hope, after all, was more dangerous than despair. One late night, Elena found Marcus by the river, staring at the water's dark surface. Argus lay at his side, head resting on his paws. "You ever think about the future?" she asked. Marcus chuckled without humor. "The future doesn't think about me." She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "Maybe it's time you stopped letting the world decide who you are." The words sank deep, unsettling something he had buried long ago. For the first time in years, Marcus let himself imagine not just surviving, but living. And though he didn't say it out loud, he realized the truth. Elena Torres had already become the bridge between the man he was and the man he might still be. The newspaper headline sat folded on Elena's desk, ink still fresh. Homeless man, dog lead police to missing child. The story had already spread online. Social media called Marcus a hero. Parents at the playground left flowers by the maintenance shed where the boy had been found. Strangers whispered about the man with the dog. Marcus hated it. He stood by the precinct doors that morning, coat collar turned up, Argus pressed against his leg. The attention unsettled him. Years of invisibility had been his shield. Now the city stared, pointing, asking questions he didn't want to answer. When Elena approached, he muttered, "This isn't me. I don't belong in headlines." She touched his arm lightly. "Maybe it's not about what you belong to. Maybe it's about what you've done." His jaw tightened. He didn't respond. That week, requests poured into the station. Community groups wanted Marcus to speak. Schools invited him to talk about safety. Even the mayor's office called. Marcus avoided them all, retreating into alleys when cameras appeared. But the city wasn't done with him. 2 weeks later, another child went missing, this time from a crowded market. Panic spread fast. Officers combed through stalls, parents wept, and bystanders shouted conflicting stories. The chaos grew until Marcus, standing quietly on the sidewalk, felt Argus tug sharply at his leash. The dog whined, pulling toward a narrow passage between two shuttered shops. Marcus followed, heart pounding. "Elena," he called, voice rough but urgent. She pushed through the crowd, eyes locking on his. Argus barked again, nails scraping the pavement. The passage reeked of rot and oil. Marcus didn't hesitate. He ducked in, Elena at his side. At the far end, behind a stack of crates, a man crouched, clutching a terrified girl. The knife in his hand gleamed faintly. Elena drew her weapon instantly. "Drop it." The man's eyes darted wildly. He pressed the blade closer. The girl whimpered. Before Elena could move, Marcus stepped forward, voice low and steady. Don't hurt her. You don't want to carry this." The man's grip faltered. For a heartbeat, doubt flashed across his face. Argus growled, teeth bared. Then the suspect bolted, shoving the child aside. Argus leapt, knocking him to the ground until officers surged in to cuff him. Elena scooped the girl up, her voice shaking as she whispered reassurance. The crowd outside erupted in cheers when they saw the child safe in her arms. But the cheers weren't for her alone. They were for the ragged man who had followed his dog into the dark without fear. This time, Marcus couldn't slip away unnoticed. Parents pressed his hands, thanking him through tears. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs popped. Argus barked, overwhelmed. Marcus's throat closed. Elena stepped in front of him, shielding him from the crush. "Back off," she snapped at the reporters. Then, softer to Marcus, "You did it again." He shook his head, dazed. "The dog did. Not me," but she saw the truth in his eyes. He had chosen to step forward when everyone else froze. That night, the precinct felt different. Officers who once mocked now clapped him on the back. Someone even brought Argus's steak from the cafeteria. The captain called Marcus into his office, offered him a permanent role assisting community outreach. "You've got something none of us do," the captain admitted gruffly. "People listen to you. They trust you." Marcus sat stiffly, uncomfortable under the praise. "I'm not a hero," he said. "No," the captain agreed. "You're something better. You're proof that people this city forget still matter." When Marcus left the office, Elena was waiting. Her smile was tired but proud. "You see?" she said. "You don't just belong, you're needed." For a moment, he couldn't speak. So he just nodded. Days turned into weeks. The city adjusted to its unlikely hero. Children ran to pet Argus whenever he trotted down the precinct steps. Neighbors in rough districts began to call Marcus by name instead of slurs. Slowly, grudgingly, respect replaced ridicule. One evening, Elena invited him to her apartment for dinner. Marcus almost refused. He hadn't sat at a real table in years. But Argus wagged his tail, and Elena's insistence left him little choice. Her apartment was modest but warm. Photos lined the shelves. A faint smell of pasta sauce filled the air. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in clean borrowed clothes, clutching a bouquet of flowers he had bought with his first paycheck. Elena's eyes widened when she opened the door. "You brought flowers?" "They seemed appropriate," he muttered, embarrassed. She smiled, taking them gently. "They're perfect." They ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, her childhood in a rough neighborhood, his memories of teaching history, Argus's stubborn habits. For the first time in years, Marcus felt not like a burden, not like a shadow, but like a man at a table where he belonged. When he left that night, Elena walked him to the door. They paused, silence heavy between them. Marcus wanted to say something, anything, but fear held him back. He turned, whispered only, "Thank you," and in her eyes, he saw an answer she hadn't spoken yet. The city still roared with Storm's crime, poverty, injustice, but Marcus no longer faced them alone. Each day, he stepped a little further out of the shadows. Argus at his side, Elena at his shoulder. And for the first time in years, when he lay down at night, Marcus Holly allowed himself to dream of tomorrow. The recognition came faster than Marcus could handle. Everywhere he went, someone seemed to know his face now. The grocer slipped an extra apple into his bag. Strangers clapped his shoulder in passing. Children ran up to pet Argus and squealed, "That's the hero dog." Marcus smiled weakly, but inside, each moment felt like a spotlight. He had spent years invisible, wrapped in rags and silence. Now the city wanted him to stand taller, to embody something he didn't believe he was. At night, when Elena dropped him off near the small apartment the precinct had helped him secure, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The shadows whispered all the things he tried to forget: failures, debts, the family that had slipped away like sand through his fingers. One evening, the memories grew too loud. He left the apartment, Argus trotting beside him, and vanished back into the alleys. Elena noticed his absence immediately. Days passed, and Marcus didn't show at the station. He missed translation assignments, skipped community meetings. The flowers he had brought to her apartment still stood in a vase, wilting. On the fourth night, she found him beneath the overpass where she had first seen him. His blanket was pulled tight, Argus curled against his side. The same posture, the same shadows, but his eyes were different. "You don't belong here anymore," she said firmly. His voice was hoarse. "Maybe I never belonged anywhere." "You're wrong." She crouched in front of him, refusing to let him turn away. "You belong with the people who believe in you. With Argus, with me." For the first time, he met her gaze directly. Rain dripped from the concrete above, spattering onto his shoulders, but he didn't flinch. "I'm scared, Elena," he admitted. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, a confession torn out after years of silence. "Every time someone thanks me, all I can think about is what I lost." What I let slip away. I'm not the man they think I am. She reached out, touching his hand. Maybe not. Maybe you're better. Because you know what it's like to fall and get back up. Argus nudged Marcus's arm as if agreeing. Slowly, Marcus's hand tightened around Elena's. From then on, Elena refused to let him drift. She invited him into patrols unofficially, letting him ride along when things were quiet. Marcus wore borrowed boots, Argus sitting proudly in the back seat. Together, they patrolled streets that had once devoured him. It startled people, this unlikely trio. Some laughed at first, but laughter faded when they saw the way Marcus calmed angry voices. How Argus stood guard like a soldier. How Elena listened to both of them. To the people they helped, immigrants, shopkeepers, lost kids. They weren't odd. They were hope. One night, they stopped by a corner store after reports of harassment. A group of teens had been bothering the owner, a weary man in his 60s. When Marcus stepped inside with Argus, the boys sneered. What's this? The homeless cop? One jeered. Marcus didn't answer. He simply stood, tall despite his lean frame, Argus bristling at his side. His silence carried more weight than threats ever could. The teens backed down under the dog's steady growl and Elena's badge. When they left, the shopkeeper pressed a loaf of bread into Marcus's hands. For the dog, he said quietly. But the gratitude in his eyes was for the man. Later that night, Elena parked by the river. The city lights rippled across the water. She turned to Marcus, heart pounding harder than any siren. You've changed since I met you, she said. He chuckled softly. Cleaner clothes, maybe. No, she said, voice barely above a whisper. You carry yourself differently. Like someone who finally knows he belongs. He grew quiet, staring at the lights. Then he whispered, That's because of you. Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected the words to cut so deep. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Argus barked once, breaking the moment, tail wagging as if impatient with the slowness of human hearts. Elena laughed softly, brushing her hair back. Marcus smiled, small but genuine. And in that instant, something shifted. The wall he had built around himself cracked, just enough for her to see the man inside. But the past was not so easily silenced. Weeks later, Marcus disappeared again, this time after an encounter with a former colleague who didn't recognize him at first. Shame burned him, the reminder of the life he had lost too sharp to bear. Elena found him 2 nights later at the edge of the city, Argus standing guard. Don't push me away, she pleaded. He bowed his head. I don't know if I can be the man you think I am. You don't have to be, she said. You just have to be here. And slowly, painfully, Marcus realized she was right. He didn't need to erase his scars. He just needed to keep showing up. For Argus, for Elena, for himself. By the end of that month, Marcus moved into a modest apartment permanently. The walls were bare, but they were his. Argus had a corner with a bed and toys. Elena helped him unpack, stacking books he had collected from donations onto a small shelf. At one point, he paused, holding a faded photograph he had kept hidden for years. It showed him younger, beside people long gone. His hands trembled. You saved me, he whispered. Elena shook her head gently. No, you saved yourself. I just reminded you who you are. Marcus swallowed hard. Argus pressed against his leg, grounding him. For the first time in years, Marcus Hawley allowed himself to believe he had a future. And maybe, just maybe, that future included more than survival. Maybe it included love. From the shadows of an alley to the warmth of a home, Marcus Hale's journey proved one timeless truth. Heroes don't always wear uniforms, and sometimes the bravest hearts beat inside the most broken souls. With Elena and Argus by his side, he found not just survival, but belonging, hope, and love. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because here, every story is a reminder that even in the darkest nights, light can still be found.